demonstrate that the human impact on the rest of creation now is very much bigger than even just a few years ago. And our job as God made us to be the priests of creation. We have this amazing responsibility, and we have to work out how to handle this. We have obeyed his command to increase and multiply. Now we have to manage this correctly with wisdom. And today we'll also talk about some of the evil plans of humans. Some of it is just wonderful, getting on with life, feeding our families. There are also very many evil plans which try to make things much worse because they want to profit. So I will touch on that, because in the old days I didn't teach about very much, but God has enlarged my heart in intercession, and now we can see that more. So you can wait for that, that's coming. Okay. So more meat. Now, the question is more meat much of a problem? It's a wonderful thing to eat. It's good for your bodies usually. This graph is from the UN, and it's a summary of lots of scientific papers. It tries to tell you how much carbon dioxide equivalent comes from different types of protein. So we start at the bottom, nuts. If you can eat nuts, because it comes from a tree, the amount of carbon released from a tree comes in again. So it's 0. And that is protein. Or if we have, let's have a look, peas, it is about the same as well. It's around neutral. You can get a lot of protein from peas, or actually from dal. Yeah, I mean, really, dal is a very, very good source of protein. But that's very different. So if you start eating pig meat, where there is a production of carbon dioxide from pigs. Or then if you go to lamb, it's quite a lot. But then it's totally different if you look at beef. Beef, actually this graph doesn't show it. The graph is too compressed. It's about twice as long a bar. The blue carries on. There we go. Somebody put it in a nice, more beautiful graph. Okay, that's to scale. So you can see beef is about twice as much as lamb. Please note, it is not the same in every part of the world. If you grow a few cows on your bit of land and they are eating things well, but the carbon concept of that is quite small. But the alternative, in the USA, in Brazil, in Argentina, they grow many cows in one place, and they feed them intensively with soya or maize, which is grown intensively. Often the soya is grown by cutting down the Amazon rainforest. So can you see the consequence of this for the whole atmosphere is very great. And so the problem is intensive agriculture, not small-scale farms where you have a few cows and some milk. That's different. So like I said yesterday, I do not like sharing this because people feel personally about the impact of eating. But we have to acknowledge that we have so many people eating so much meat now compared to the past, that it is having a very big impact now. And because the lower ones here, like eggs or rice or dal, you can eat the same good protein without eating just meat. And I believe the world has to move to less meat. I do think that. I did not say no meat. All right? That's a different position. Some people believe that, fine. I said less meat. Okay? Maybe like what our grandparents ate. Special, beautiful meat sometimes, not every day. Because the atmosphere cannot cope with this. And with a cow, amazing how God made cows. It is amazing. They can eat grass and turn it into milk and beef. This is amazing. If you eat grass, yeah, you're going to die. You cannot eat enough grass and digest it because you have a simple stomach. They have 3 stomachs. They are amazing. They eat it again. It goes down. The creation there is amazing. But the process involves a lot of methane. And that is a very bad gas in the atmosphere. It's worse than carbon dioxide. That is where the problem is. So I had to mention it. Right, now let's try to think of a big concept. Try to think big picture about climate change. And I'm going to use John Holdren's quote. John Holdren, an energy expert from Harvard. And he said this about climate change. He said, we basically have 3 choices. Mitigation, adaptation, suffering. Sorry, technical words. Mitigation means reducing emissions. So the choice is reducing emissions, adapting to change, and suffering. 3 elements. We are going to do some of each. So there are places which now flood. They did not flood for many generations. Now that is suffering. Okay. There are places where we grow different food now compared to 10 years ago. That is adaptation. Or you build your house high on the hill, not down near a river, so it will not flood. That's adaptation. You change the society. Mitigation, that's reducing emissions. I talked a bit already. So that is burning less fossil fuel and eating less beef, really. These are the two biggest ones. We're going to do some of each. We're already doing all 3. The question, there is a question. What is the mix? And in a way, one outbalances the other. The more emissions reduction that we do, the less adaptation will be required. You see that? If we emit less carbon dioxide, the floods will be less, the heat waves will be less, the wildfires will be less. So that's less adaptation and also less suffering. So it's like a balance. If we want less suffering, and God knows we do need less suffering, if we want less effort on adaptation, then we have to put more effort into reducing emissions. We'll look a little bit more now at the emissions question. No, about adaptation. Here's an adaptation I spotted in England. And my father-in-law helped build this church building in the 1980s. By this month, about a few years ago, the rain is getting more intense in England, quite a lot more. We have more heavy rainstorms. The heaviest rainstorm is more heavy than we ever used to have. We're having bits of flooding. And the roof of this church building was, when the heavy rain came, the rain would fly off and it would flood inside the building. So clever people, they said, what we need is 2 pipes. It was built with the grey one, and then they said, well, we just need a black one as well. We need 2. And now when there's very intense rain, it does not go into the building, it goes off. This is a very simple example of adaptation. It's needed all across the world. If you have designed a roof for a certain amount of rain, you've built the particular downpipes, they're usually not big enough now. Our YWAM Paisley building, which was built 130 years ago, the roofing expert who was looking at it with me about 1 month ago. He said, everywhere I look, the drain is being overwhelmed by extra rain. So we are adapting. Okay? If we can adapt, we won't get floods inside our building. If we don't, we get this problem. That's adaptation. Right, here's another picture. Now this is from a Chinese city in 2021, and they had just had an incredibly heavy rainstorm. It was the second heaviest rain anywhere on the planet ever measured, including Northern India. Northern India, you may know Northern India in the Himalaya has the wettest part of the world, but it's not always the most intense. That's usually in a typhoon. Right. So look, this was a day when they had a disaster in the city and they were rescuing people from the floods, but unfortunately the city hospital was also flooded. So their wonderful ambulance system, they have this special emergency truck which goes in a disaster. China is quite good at disaster management, but it was underwater. Amazingly, the Chinese are so well prepared, they had a lot of boats as well, so they could rescue people and bring the casualties to the hospital in a boat. This picture illustrates how adaptation has limits. Right? It's very hard for this hospital to adapt to very heavy rain. They would need to build a concrete wall and pumps or something, or maybe build the hospital again. That's expensive. You spent millions and millions of dollars on one hospital. And then look at the quote. This is from an academic group. The risks are compounding, and without immediate action, impacts will be devastating. What that means is you don't just have one problem, a flood. You have another problem. Your healthcare is impacted, and one hits the next. So that's why climate change is serious. Like I said at the beginning, is it serious? Is it not? It is. It's serious. Oh yeah, this was, you must laugh sometimes at a scientist. Okay, I am a scientist. I have a lab coat, you know. This man, Dave, is a scientist, and he is very careful with his words. He never expresses his emotions, but this day he was expressing his emotions. Extraordinary, almost unbelievable rainfall in Henan province. That was the same event as, of course, this flood. Because so much rain fell, the scientists were scratching their head. How can that much rain be in the clouds at one time before the one city so intensely? It was the second most intense rainfall ever recorded. And the reason is a very important fact. Warmer air will hold much more moisture, so you can then have heavier rain. Now, you probably know this intuitively. If you are in a cold situation, in maybe a cold car, and you're breathing, you get the moisture inside the car. You know that? And you have to heat up the windows. That's a northern situation. You know that you get condensation on windows. That's because the cold window takes the moisture from the warm air. Right? It's the same thing in the outside air, that a warm day can hold much more moisture in it. For every degree centigrade, the amount is 7% more moisture. So someone should do the maths, I've forgotten. 10 degrees more is about, it's more than double. It's compounding. So that's why climate change gives us intense rain and floods. Much more than a few years ago when the atmosphere was cooler. And also that's why 1.5 degrees, the unhelpful phrase that my American American guy said, 1.5 degrees, it sounds like it, so what, 1.5 degrees, we're already 5 degrees warmer than when we woke up here, you know, outside. That's 1.5 sounds nothing, but in energy terms, in moisture terms, is a big difference. And I've lost count of the number of people, mainly in Africa, who say the rain does not come when we used to expect it. These days, we wait, it's late or it's early, and then it comes very, very, very intense, and we lose our soil, or we lose our crops sometimes. If they planted the seed, sometimes they lose the seed. This is really terrible. And then I heard about it when I was in a YWAM gathering in Hawaii. Lots of the different leaders were saying this.
How many millimeters is a heavy rainfall?
Depends where you are.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're in a situation where you're used to 200 millimeters in a day, then if you get 300 millimeters one day, that's heavy. In the UK, 200 millimeters in a day is considered very, very heavy rain. In Dehradun, you get 200 millimeters in 12 hours, right? Yeah. So it depends what you're used to. And if you have the eyes, different parts of the world have different size of river. And it's because the river is adapted. God designed these things. He adapts the river size to the expected rainfall. And one of the interesting things is rivers are changing now as they respond to extra rain. Himalaya is really very big difference. The Ganges always has changed, but now it's changing more. Yeah, I think this one, I'll get the figure. This one was something like 800 millimeters in 36 hours. just amazing. But can you imagine, everybody, if every part of your city had this much rain falling on it? Now, if that's on a roof, it's coming off the roof, so it's going down. So then the streets just fill up with drains. They built these wonderful drainage systems in this new Chinese city. It filled up. In fact, have I got the graph? Somewhere I have a picture where they were in the underground railway and the pumps were pumping all the water out. Unfortunately, it was not quick enough, and several people died in the underground, in the metro. So, all the best engineering, but not an awareness of how quickly the climate is changing. So it's important to realize also that every little bit warmer, and the figure doesn't make sense, 1.5, 2, 4 degrees sounds silly, but we're talking about a lot of energy in the overall system. And a little bit warmer gives you much more warmer in the poles area, and a little bit warmer in the tropics. The general rule, the colder places are getting more warmer, okay, and the wetter places are getting more wetter. It's roughly that. And this is a summary of the weather impacts. We get more frequent and more intense extreme heat, more frequent, more intense heavy rainfall. Some areas get more drought. Sometimes the drought ends with a heavy rainstorm, like in the west of the United States in the last year. More frequent fires. And there are some parts of the world which are used to fires. Most of Australia, a lot of Western America. Fire is normal, but they're more intense than they used to be. And there's other places where we never used to have fires, and now we have more, or we have fires. And that's a problem because we're not used to it. So the Mediterranean area of Europe had very, very bad fires the last 2-3 years. And in the old days, we had small fires. Now we have big fires here. Then we don't always think about it, but the ocean, of course, don't forget God made the earth with more than, it's about 2/3 of the earth is covered in ocean. Really, we are a blue planet. It's absorbing most of the extra energy, 90%. It's absorbing most of the carbon dioxide, 95%, I think. And the result is it turns more acid, just a little bit more acid. And that means that most marine animals cannot form their shell or their bones so well. That's very, very important because the ones that cannot form their shell are the ones which are eaten by other. So the whole chain is affected by that. And there's less oxygen as well. We don't imagine that because it's away from our thinking, but the people that study it, or indeed the fish, the people that are getting the fish for us to eat, they know this is a big change already. So this is all trying to summarize how we have more impacts. So I'm going to just look at the way that temperatures have changed. These are measurements from all over the world. We're very careful to make sure we pick the right places to measure, and if there's changes, we adapt for that. So from 1850, which is when there were a lot of coal was starting to be produced, the temperatures on average, from recent average, were low, and it got warm, then it got cold, then it got warm, and then in the last 2-3 decades, it's increased quite dramatically, and that's coinciding with the increases in carbon dioxide. Then I'll just the same graph in a different way, in stripes colors, is trying to help people understand or imagine that, oh gosh, it really has got worse. Please note, it doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes up, and up, up, down, up, down, up, down. There are systems which are complicated, but overall, it's very clear. Yeah. Now, okay, I'm now going to take this graph and put it on its side. Okay, so now we have time, the oldest time at the top, the more recent time at the bottom. You can see it's getting warmer. Okay, remember this, and look at this one. Same graph in a different way, because every year the actual temperature varies around the world a bit. And so that's represented by these kind of curves, they're called histograms. So the average temperature here was still of a range in different parts of the world compared to the average in its location. But you can see that what's happening is the range is shifting to being warmer. So there's still some places this year which are experiencing a lot of snowfall, just not Switzerland. The Alps have had very low snowfall this year. But overall, there are fewer places which have cold weather. In fact, a funny thing happened in America this year. They had intense snowfall, record snowfall, about 2 months ago, and then within 2 days, it changed to being record warmth for that part of January. So the changes, the intensity is changing quickly. My friend Catherine Hayhoe, climate scientist, says this is weirding. We talked about global warming. That's a silly word. That feels nice and warm. Now, it's not the good word for it. The good word is global weirding. Things became weird. What's the French word for weird? Weird. Unusual.
Weird.
Strange. Ils sont fous. Un peu fou. Is that right? It's, what's happened? Everything has changed. We say global weirding. C'est bizarre. C'est vraiment bizarre. Oui. Le météo est bizarre. Yeah, that's better. Right, I'm just going to share a little bit of data from the last 2 years because it's very interesting. Right, every blue line is showing the temperature of the ocean, the North Atlantic, for 1 year. And you can see they waver along, and they're basically bunched together. I think that's the last 25 years. But then last year, 23, the line went absolutely off the charts. The people making the charts had to make a new chart with a bigger scale. Huh?
Is it always bad that climate is changing?
No, not always. Some things are better, but not many, because you can't predict it very well. Yeah. It's not all bad. Okay. Scotland is using less energy to warm the houses. Yes, you can't say that's all bad.
This winter was really good.
Yeah. But then we go through to this year. That's just last week. So the yellow line is 23. You see how different it is to the history. And this year is even higher. as a climate scientist, this makes me very, very scared, to be honest. I see this and I cry because I understand the data, and I think if it's that much more energy in the ocean, this will affect evaporation, it will affect the clouds, it will affect the rain, it will affect the spit of this fish. It is very worrying. And sometimes people, activists, they say we are in a climate emergency. This is the sort of thing they mean. It's like, it is getting worse. We need to act quickly to reduce emissions. So now I'm going to talk about another scary area. I'm going to give you lots of scary, okay? Sorry, it's just, I am. I'm being Jeremiah. Don't forget, Book of Jeremiah, he says to them, do not think you can escape and go to Egypt. No, do not think you can fight these invaders. No, if you do that, you will be killed. Just go to exile, right? And nobody wants to hear Jeremiah. So just now I'm Jeremiah, okay? Jeremiah, of course, was right. Anyway, here we go, right. Sea level rise. The sea has been very steady for many, many, many centuries. It goes up and down just a tiny little bit, but hardly. And so if you go to if you go to a port that maybe the Portuguese built in West Africa or Sierra Leone or something like that, the port is the same as it was. They didn't need to change. But if you go back further into history, it did change quite a lot. And we have Aboriginal records from Australia where they tell stories about their ancestors, and they remember the times when they had to move every year because the sea was coming onto land where it was previously dry. That happened about 10,000 years ago. Before that, so much water was not in the ocean but in the ice sheets that there was less water in the ocean. So the amount of water is steady, but sometimes it's stored in ice, sometimes it's more in the ocean. So 1.5 degrees does not sound very much. Actually, if you are a glacier, it's a lot. If this had, okay, better. Imagine, this is a block of ice. I just took it from the freezer. I'm going to put it here. What will happen in the next hour? It will melt. There will be a puddle, right? There will be no ice. We all know that. Ice lives with an equilibrium. We don't know if it will melt in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 hour, but we know that it will eventually not stay ice in a warm room. And all the big glaciers in the world were roughly equilibrium. They lost ice and they gained ice at the same rate until just quite recently. And now we're at a stage where we're losing ice from Greenland very rapidly. Greenland has a huge ice sheet. It's 3 kilometers deep in the middle. Amazing, hard to imagine. So much ice. But
3 kilometers deep.
3 kilometers deep in the middle. Yeah, and the snow falls on it every year, builds it a bit, and it flows slowly to the sea. In the old days, that was perfect. The same snow fell, the same flowing out to the sea. It was equal. But not always, because at the end of the Ice Age, it was even bigger. Then it got smaller. Now we're at a stage where on the top of Greenland, some days it rains instead of snow. This means it is not building up, and it means it flows more rapidly. But this one here in Antarctica is one which many people are very scared about for good reason. It is a particular glacier called Thwaites Glacier, I wonder if you can see this. Will the Zoom people see this?
Yes.
I'll put my camera on.
No. I mean, from here you can see.
Yeah, you see? Okay, you can see. So imagine, see if I can do it. Imagine if this is the rock face under the sea. You have a lot of ice. Imagine this is white. All right, it's coming from inside Antarctica. It flows down, and then it goes to the sea like this. So at some point, it's floating. At this point, it's on the rock under the ocean. Now, when you get warmer water coming under, it melts here. And the scary thing is, see if I can, that the rock is not flat. The rock gets slightly deeper as you go towards Antarctica, then it goes back up. If this bit melts, you have warm water which can go not just to here, but a long way. It's about 80 miles, 120 kilometers inland, and it can start to melt a lot more ice. Now, this is called a feedback. So a small beginning accelerates to a big beginning. And so the Thwaites Glacier is one which was probably in the middle of collapse now, actually. And when it melts and loses more ice, we will have measurable sea level rise of several centimeters. And the point is, we are committed to some of this already. We definitely will have, in the next 100, 200, 300 years, some increase in sea level. But how big is that difference depends on how warm, how hot the planet gets. So currently, sea level is just rising a little bit. It's 3 millimeters per year, although last year it was 4. And so you can see every year the sea goes slightly up, slightly down, but it is increasing. So we're not worried about tomorrow. We're worried about 50 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, and our ancestors, our descendants' time. Because once you start melting a glacier, it's hard to stop it. I just need to put up a funny thought on this one. Do you see there's this point here where in 2012, it looked like maybe it was not increasing anymore. 2 years it went down. So one of the people who writes on this said, look, see, over the last 2 years, sea levels have not increased at all. Actually, they show a slight drop. We should be told about this. His idea, Lomborg, is nobody tells you the truth of climate. It's much better than they tell you. But this is the sort of thing he does. He picks a little bit of data, says, look, it's fine. Don't waste your money on climate adaptations. Well, you know, what's happened since then? And he, of course, has not apologized. He's not like that. So there's a few things he says which are quite interesting, but most of what he says I now do not trust. And unfortunately, because he makes statements which sound good, you find people think he's great. He's not. he's a fraud. God bless him. Bring him some revival. So we have to be careful who we listen to and look at the long timescales. So I'm just going to quote this guy, James Hansen, who is one of the best climate scientists in the world. We know that the Earth's history at 2 degrees, we know from the history, at 2 degrees warming, we would eventually lead to sea level rise of several meters. The last interglacial period, so between the 2 glaciations, 120,000 years ago, the last time it was warmer than today, sea level was 6 to 9 meters higher. That would mean the loss of almost all coastal cities. It is unthinkable, but we walk into such a situation with our eyes open, and yet the science is well understood. So it's shocking to realize that the people who understand this very deeply know that some of this is definitely coming. The question is, how bad do we get it? Can you name a city by the coast from your nation? Chennai. Yes. Mumbai. Not Switzerland. You're fine. London. You have a city by the Burkina? No, you're not on the coast. No, you're in. Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about Lagos.
Lagos,
Yeah.
Nigeria, Ghana,
Yeah.
Ivory Coast, and Senegal.
Senegal.
Burkina, Mali, Niger.
Yeah, Niger. Fine, yeah. Okay, so right now, this year, next year, it's not a big problem. But why would we allow this to get worse for our children's children? The biggest city, Tokyo, New York, one in China. What's it called? Anyway, several in China. They are flat land next to sea level. We will have to move from them. So this is why climate change is not a small problem. It is not a small problem. Lagos. Right, here we go. This one is a map of Lagos with the anticipated sea level rise, maybe to 2050, is in red. We don't know exactly what will be 2050, but you can see just 2-3 decades away, some areas will be under the sea. So my hint, if you have a friend in property development, tell them to sell. You see that, Lagos? It's true, it will be like that. Right, okay, a slightly different direction now. Sorry for the heaviness of this one. It's just a fact. We have to grieve sometimes. Although there are more weather disasters, more extreme weather, actually far fewer people are dying in these, which is good news because people have got better at understanding it and predicting and protecting ourselves from extreme weather. Even so, we have to get good at this. And if you are in a location where you are close to the river, can you maybe move? After 10 years, maybe you can move up the hill slightly. If you are in a situation where you run out of water every summer, maybe you can build special ways to protect, to store a lot more water, because the weather is more unreliable. So these are adaptations I'm talking about. And this is a bit of big scale data about losses from insurance. Insurance companies are the ones who noticed first that the weather was really changing, or the first people outside science. Because insurance companies are very, very careful to know how often there will be a flood, how often there will be hailstorms that are damaging, all these things. And they noticed back in the 90s that all their calculations were wrong. Well, Switzerland is in the middle of this because they have lots of very good insurance companies. Same in the UK. And this one, so there are some things which are not affected by climate change, like earthquakes, like volcanoes, and those are in red. They have changed exactly the same amount. You still have some. But the ones which are to do with weather and climate have increased a lot. So severe storms and floods, which is the green and the blue, have gone up and up and up and up and up. This is one of the ways I explain to people who are not very clear. No, honestly, there has been a change. Okay, a little bit of a digression into emotions here. So many people start saying, well, climate change, no, not a problem. It's not real. And then maybe they move to, okay, it's real, just not sure, maybe humans did or didn't, maybe it's natural cycle. And then people, when they learn a bit more, they say, oops. And then sometimes if they learn a bit more, well, they might swear, which I've covered up. Okay. This is a typical, many people go through this timeline. And if you are in the middle of understanding, oh, this is worse than I thought, this is a moment to remind ourselves God is on the throne. God has helped his people be salt and light and helpful in the most terrible situations. And YWAM has been helpful in many of the very worst situations the world has ever faced, because we have given up our lives to Jesus and he can use us to help the people. So we have to, I'm sorry, this is a big subject I'm not so good at, right? But we have to grieve the sadness of what we're losing and embrace the opportunity or the needs of the people as much as possible and adapt as quickly as possible. Yeah, so maybe you have some of these feelings, if you understood what I said. But it is really angry. I get very angry, but we've allowed this to go so bad because, like James Hansen said, this science is so well understood. We know it. Just like, you know, if I let go of this, what is going to happen? Everybody knows gravity is real. This carbon dioxide making the planet warmer is totally real. It's as well known in science, really, as gravity. It's not a question. I get angry. Blame. I get angry that certain people knew it and denied it. And they even tell us they didn't. So, but if you're a believer in Jesus, which we are, you cannot stay with blame a long time. If I'm angry with Marcus, we do not have good fellowship. If I'm angry and it continues into a big problem, we don't resolve the problem. It's the same when you're interceding. If you are praying for somebody who is doing you harm, you have to have God's love for this. You cannot do that naturally. No human being can pray for their enemy. You have to be a Jesus human being to pray for your enemy. And that needs process. Grief is one. Of genuine sadness. I'm very sad. The next one is serving. I said Nightingale. The very first, the nursing profession, the people who are nurses, were started by this lady, Nightingale, who saw the suffering in a war, and she went to help all the injured people in the war. So her response, she could not stop the war, but she could help the injured soldiers. And that can be us, definitely is us. And there's another area of serving, which is into policy or campaigning or helping people to change. And that if you want to get into that, maybe visiting a United Nations conference with my group is something you can do. The next one, really, you do not find in activists. The secular activists, the non-Christians, don't do this one much. Humility, identification, seeking the Lord. My friend, Catherine Hayhoe, she's an acquaintance, not really a friend. She was asked, she's a climate scientist Christian, she was asked to go to a Texas oil company and explain climate change. And she knew that the oil people would feel she is a bit of an enemy because she would explain to them that the oil is part of the problem. And so she sought the Lord. How do I address this? And when she went to talk to them, she said, I want to thank you all for helping the world improve so much by putting all your efforts into cheap, reliable energy. Thank you very much. Now is the time to move beyond. So she acknowledged the humanity, the benefit of these people. Very important. And then seeking the Lord. Anytime I'm faced with a massive problem, which is beyond me, I'm seeking the Lord. I think it would be right for everybody. Lord, what should we do? How do we change? How do we help our people? And in the seeking, remember I started yesterday talking about how sin affects the rest of creation. the rest of creation responds. This is a consequence, partly, of human sin. It's been greed and it's been stupid denial of good advice. So I know, you know, that when we repent, extraordinary things happen in our life or our relationships. The science does not really understand that. But I believe that if we, the people of God, apologize to God for not looking after his world properly, that has some effect. The world notices, the actual physical world. Right. I think, am I going to a quarter past?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep going. So now here's a few ideas. And these, I'm listing these because these are things that our people have repented of before the Lord when they examine God with God. Why am I part of this problem? Because I'm another human being, you know. So the first lie, the world and its resources is there to be used no matter what. God put us in a garden with wonderful resources, good food to eat, good animals to enjoy, etc. But there is a level of responsibility of how much you use. The lie there is that it doesn't matter. It's like the younger brother who took his inheritance and wasted it. You can ask God, is there anything in my life where I feel like I can use? It's not a fruit of the Spirit. Hopefully this one does not apply to you. They say, oh, so what? It doesn't bother me. I will keep burning my oil as long as and maybe somebody will stop me. So that's a denial of responsibility. Now, we cannot quickly change, all of us. We cannot quickly change from oil, but we have to move towards that. Here's a lie. If I just buy this thing, I will be happier. That's the consumerist lie, okay? It's like, if you have the most beautiful car, your life will be happy. They tell you that, it's an idol. But listen, it is in the church. In many of us, maybe we have a little bit in our brain, I would be happier if... No, God is your provider. There are people who say we don't have to do anything. This is a philosophical idea. We don't have to do anything because the global market will find the cheapest way to do it, which in some ways is true, but the market needs influence from politicians' policies. How about this one? This is true in many parts of the church. They think if the world ends in fire, then I don't need to look after it. There's 2 points here. First, does it really end in fire? Second one, I don't need to look after it. Even if the world is completely destroyed by fire, which is probably not what the Bible says, even if that's true, still Genesis tells us we should serve and protect. Genesis 2:15. And of course, we will be judged by that. God will judge us. Did you look after my creation? Did you rule the right way or rule the wrong way? So we do need to look after it. The next question is, in your theology, does the world really get completely burned? If that's a question, I have a section which I could do, because it's not what the Bible says. It's a misunderstanding of those passages. And the last one, you often find people who say, well, they told me this would happen, it didn't happen. They told me this would happen, it didn't happen. So this will be fine as well. For example, before year 2000, many computer systems were going to be in trouble. In the end, it wasn't a big problem. And that's because so many computer technicians put lots of time into adapting the system. When I grew up, we were very scared that Russia would bomb the whole of the West and we'd all die in either 1 second or a few weeks of famine. And actually, we did not have a nuclear war. Well, we got quite close to it sometimes. Thank God. But the way we avoided disaster was prayer and was careful work. This is the same. The way to avoid total climatic disaster is careful work and repentance, I think. So just because the disasters don't always come, doesn't mean that this one won't. So what do we need to do? Is my little slogan: stop burning stuff. Almost anywhere we're burning, particularly fossil fuels, we have to move to stopping. And that will take us a long time. These are complicated technologies. But in 50 years' time, or maybe 30 years' time, most of your burning will not be fossil fuels. Okay? That's where we're going. And the answer in most cases is to electrify things, because it's very, very efficient. But you can electrify heat, so that's with a heat pump. Electric vehicles are getting better every year and slowly getting cheaper. They are very efficient. I'll show you that in a minute. Electric lights, we all know, are much more efficient than a candle. Did you know that, by the way? If you burn a candle compared to using electric light, it's like 1,000 times less carbon intensive. So the electric light is much more efficient than a gas light or a candle light. So progress is needed. And then, change how meat is produced. Okay, so how meat is produced. I did not say stop eating meat. No, I did not say that. And then overall, we need to use less with the things we do. So things like, when we leave this room, we should turn off the light. Actually, the lights do not use much energy, but still, we should reduce how much we use. If you can do it more efficiently, if you can have a smaller car, do it. If you have a family of 5, you need a bigger car. But if possible, have smaller. That's efficiency. So for individuals, maybe at a household level, that doesn't apply in Africa. Insulation to keep the heat in. Okay. It actually, for when you have buildings which have air conditioning, they also need insulation because it keeps the cold in, heat out. Transport, cooking. Yeah, so people can make steps. We as a family have made a lot of steps, and now really mainly electric and mainly clean energy. And we have a lovely warm house, just to say, in Scotland. That's amazing. So I always have this struggle, because many of my talks are to Western societies with those sorts of steps. But many of the impacts are for these sorts of societies. This is, I think, Guatemala, where they are feeling the impact of the different rain system, and it really, they're not at fault. It was not their starting. And so I believe you had some teaching, Farming God's Way. So the principles that God gave to the man who started Farming God's Way are just superb. And interestingly, those principles of regenerative agriculture are being adopted even in mainstream agriculture in many places. For example, in the UK, half of the land that used to be ploughed every year, they now use cover crops. And it's cheaper. They get bigger yields. So many of the principles apply in hand farming and in big farming, because it's God's principles. And I love the way that he discovered these by seeking the Lord. You have that story, I think. And the Lord revealed it. How many more things are there that we do not know yet because we haven't sought the Lord? I think anybody who seeks the Lord for a solution usually because they know they need it. The Lord has huge resources of knowledge and wisdom. He designed the whole system. We would be stupid if we just listened to science experts and not to the Lord. We would also be stupid if we do not listen to science experts. Okay, we need both. Here's a lady I respect very much from Mali. Maybe, did you meet this lady? Rachel Kwandiogo. I think her name is Budiogo, thank you. And her ministry has involved sometimes planting trees in some West African nations. And they have seen not only the benefits to the environment, but then they found that the villagers did not have to spend so long going to get firewood. And they said, please now, can you build us or run a school? Because our children are not spending hours going to find wood. We can now get it locally. So you have many beneficial consequences from one act of planting more trees. I really respect her. If you want to send an outreach team to Mali or maybe one of the other places to plant trees, it's very good. God will honour that. Be in touch with Rachel. And the next area is nature-based solutions, which is the UN idea for the world. The rest of creation can absorb much more carbon if we try and help it. And this is an area where, as you understand how God built things, you realize we're missing lots of opportunities. I'm going to zoom in to this one. What are nature-based solutions? They help climate change, they help development, they help health, they help with food and water security, they reduce the impact of disasters, and they avoid biodiversity loss. There are so many benefits from improving the bit of creation. And so farmers and people managing land are in an amazing position to help. I'll get to zoom in again. Here's some examples. I don't know, maybe you cannot see it close enough. I'll read it. So at the top, protection, restoration, and sustainable use of forest landscapes. It secures water supply, it controls erosion, and it reduces other risks. And we've come across people who are doing what's known as agroforestry. And in their forests, they grow tall trees with fruit, and they grow bushes with other fruit, and on the land, low level, they are growing herbs and other things you can eat. And the one benefits the next, benefits the next. So many levels. So in a small area, you can have a very, very productive system for food. And guess what? It helps with birds, it helps with insects, because they eat and they protect your forest. So there's a lot of clever ideas going on with this. And in YWAM, a few people are developing it. And if it's something which maybe in your location you could do, or you could start it in a new place, there's a lot of expertise, and we can try to help network to get these expertise too. But one example is in the Hawaii Kona base. They have a small area where they've been demonstrating this as a research. And the School of Sustainability, one starting in Malawi soon, I believe it teaches a little bit about agroforestry. So these are things that you see, little examples where people are doing amazing things. You think if that can happen in a bigger scale, we will absorb so much carbon dioxide, it will help reduce the heating. But it has these other advantages. A forest, when there's very, very heavy rain, it absorbs most of the water. So it does not flow downstream and cause flooding. This is an adaptation. Because we have heavy rain, let's do things which prevent the damage from the heavy rain. It's one example. But I give this example because the United Nations is very keen on it. There should be funding in some places to help you do this move. Okay? We can work together maybe to find that funding to start the process. And I'm quite excited that YWAM has so many places where we can explore these things, develop these things. But the reason that this is so important, this is the last one I'll do of this section, is because with warmer temperatures and extreme rainfall changes, it does impact how much food we can grow. Look at the green quote here. During the 2040s, there's a 50% chance of synchronous crop failure. That means where you have crop failure in different parts of the world at the same time. So when we grew up, sometimes there was a problem in one part of the world where there wasn't the right rain. It was a problem, but we could buy food from another part of the world. I remember the East African famine in the 1980s. That was an example. But these days, we're now moving to bigger problems where actually several areas could have crop failure at the same time. Some people say the climate crisis is really a food crisis. When we have international food problems, which some of it will probably come now, we should be able to help our neighbours. That's God's standard. So in Wylam Paisley, for the first time, we're growing some food on our little bit of land. We're trying to learn how to do this. And I'm surprised how many Wylam places God has been speaking to them to grow food or to learn farming. I believe it's because we're moving to a more unstable food supply, and God wants us to be ready and salt and light. Right, I'll pause here. It's 1:15. Just God lead me to what to do. Here we have this one. I was talking about future food challenges. Okay, that's real. No. I am not in the right one. That one. Good. Here's an example of an extreme flood. It was in Germany, not many miles from here actually. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. All right. We know this was an extreme flood because the village had stood with old buildings for hundreds and hundreds of years. With very, very intense rainfall, and the flood came through. It killed, I think, 80 people. Unusual. Incidentally, the weather scientists warned about this flood, and the message was not passed to people. And one adaptation we have to do is get better warning systems. We can save many lives with good warnings. So the scientists said this would be bad. The local authorities said, no, we'll be all right. Then it came very fast. And again, people not expecting it. They knew their town. They know this town does not flood badly. They didn't. So what was, right, this is the principle. Unusual rain now happens often, and rain never happened, now sometimes happens. So our past experience is not a guide to future, which is what New York found in 2015 with an unusual hurricane. And that cost billions and billions and billions to New York. And oh, that was the China city when the flooding happened and the underground trains, the metro, had the problems. And 2 years ago in Canada, there was this extreme heat dome in an area of Canada which is normally calm and cool. People move there for their retirement because it's nice conditions, but they had temperatures of over 40 degrees, and one town was completely destroyed by a wildfire that day. But the calculations by scientists was you could not do this without all the energy from the CO2. It's the extra energy that produced this system. Now, that particular system, in that part of this was America on that day, the local government has now tried to take oil companies to court saying your product produced the carbon dioxide that produced this extreme heat. And they've got quite a good case. And all around the world, there are many places which are taking oil companies to court saying, you deceived us very deliberately because you knew what happened and you told us no problem. So this is one court case. There's one going on in the whole of California. California is a big place. They are suing oil companies. So it's very interesting because there is a question of justice here. We have these warnings from the UN. IPCC is the scientific body in the UN. Code red, very serious. Take notice, change quickly. And the oil companies say the opposite. In fact, Antonio Guterres, who is the UN Secretary General, he said climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals. But the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing production of fossil fuels. It is moral and economic madness. I agree with what he says. The real problem is the people who still say we'll have more and more and more fossils. And that is not just, well, in many countries. And let's have a look at more stupidity. I'm nearly being political here. Careful, I don't want to say something political, okay? I'm looking at the moral situation. The dotted line is today. The world subsidizes oil and gas and coal very, very much. I know in Nigeria, they stopped one subsidy for fuel last year or the year before. They stopped it really suddenly. It was a great pain for the people. Probably not a good idea to stop on one day. They should have gone slowly. But in America, there are many, many ways the government gives money to oil companies and gas companies. The UK is giving money to Norwegian companies to develop oil and gas. And they say it's because we need the oil and gas and we need the jobs. But hang on. Why would you subsidize something which produces more damage? The answer is because these are very powerful people. So it's around about $7 trillion according to the IMF. $7 trillion? That isn't stupid money. And the story here is important, but the oil industry in particular has carefully worked out how to deceive the public and block climate action. And if you want to go deep in that, the BBC did some good reporting, but they're reporting on another set of researchers who published something called Merchants of Doubt, and they carefully looked at where the information had gone wrong and who funded who. They put billions of dollars into selling messages. Messages like, well, of course we need this, and clean energy is not ready, and that sort of thing. Don't pass that. We found that the oil companies, particularly Exxon, which is the biggest company, had a special climate research unit in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. They put lots of money into it. And their climate researchers did some predictions. What will happen if we continue to emit more and more carbon dioxide, if we continue to burn more oil and gas and coal? And their predictions are the dotted lines on this graph. This is their own data. This was published in 1982 by Exxon. Sorry, this was not published. This was reported internally in Exxon. They did not make it public. Somebody found it in Texas University archives. So, good bit of detective work to find this. But dotted lines are their predictions. Will it be bad? Will it be middle? And the solid line in the middle is the actual measurements of temperature. So their predictions with fairly simple models actually are exactly what's happened. They knew really well. But what did they tell the public? The head of Exxon said, no, the science is not very clear yet. I'll wait till it's more clear. They said, but there's no alternative. We've looked for alternatives. There's no alternative. But the reality is he knew how to make a lot of money one way and he was going to keep going. But the deception is the problem. And the deception for greed is why they're having these court cases. Eventually, some court cases will really win big because the evidence is very clear that they decided to deceive. If they hadn't done that 30 years ago, we would be in a much better position. We would not have this huge increase. So this is a moral problem. Yeah? It's a sin. Because the damage to people is huge. Please, God, have mercy. Right? Maybe if I was in that position, I would believe the same thing. Oh, we should be careful what we tell the public. We need our shareholders or something. I'm a human. I know how people get deceived. But honestly, this is a serious sin. And I think we need to take it seriously. And really, the best solution is most fossil fuels have to stay in the ground and we move away from it. It will take time, but we need to move in that direction. For example, Swiss Re, which is a big insurance company, have recently said we will no longer invest in oil and gas because it makes the problem worse, so we have more payouts. They have such huge investments, they realize this would benefit their own investments. And so academics look like this: averting planetary peril means avoiding complete disaster. This was in COP26. And there's lots of discussions about how we do that. But any area that we have ability, we should be doing something. And even the secular journalists recognize that there's a kind of message coming from the rest of creation. That sends a warning. I believe the prophets among us have to be tuning to what the creation is saying. You know, in Romans 8, it says all creation is groaning. It's groaning. It's sending us a message about the fallen nature of humanity. And now, as if it wasn't enough, there are some even worse things which we are looking at now, which is called a tipping point. A tipping point is very simple in idea. I'll demonstrate. If I push this towards the edge, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, no problem. Oh, we get to a stage where one extra push, you cannot bring it back. That's a tipping point. And we look at scientists, we look at past climates, and we see sometimes when it changes quite rapidly, not as rapidly as now. It goes into an ice age, it comes out of an ice age. This is due to feedbacks, tipping point. So we know these things happen in the system. I'm just going to talk about 2 or 3 of them. The Amazon forest dieback, down here. When it gets warmer, the trees which are used to a certain temperature cannot grow so well. And so they don't emit so much water, so inland gets more dry, and eventually there will be a stage where the Amazon becomes not a forest, but a savanna, just like Burkina. Okay, that condition, of grasslands. The scientists studying Amazon say we're really very probably happening now. It's happening about this decade. And it's made worse because they've cut down so much forest. That's a feedback. It's not good. The top one here, permafrost. Some people, you know, but in the north of Alaska or northern Siberia is land which is completely frozen. It's like ice in the soil. Slowly now, this is melting. So, for example, in Alaska, where they take oil out of the ground and they build their oil rig on permafrost, it's nice and solid because it's frozen. But now that's melting and the oil rig is wobbling each year. So they've decided they have to freeze the ground again, and they've employed a huge refrigeration unit to freeze this ground artificially, which is such a bizarre idea. So when you get permafrost melting, then some of that soil decays and it gives you more carbon dioxide. The total amount could be so much it will warm the planet again, even more. So what do we need to do? This organization, IEA, International Energy Agency, was set up by governments of the world when there was an oil crisis in 1972, 73. And in many years, they've advised the world's governments on energy. And they used to predict how much oil would be needed, how much gas. Just in the last few years, they've started saying, climate is too serious, we have to quickly change to renewables. And then they report how. This report, 2021, talks about a U-turn. It's like a repentance of the world economy, and it listed every way we could do that. And they said that we have to increase investment in clean energy to 4 trillion, 21. Right, last year, it was 1.7 trillion. So already the increase is going very quickly. Now, this is also IEA. This was from 2 weeks ago. And they've compared here investments in fossil fuels to renewables. Global picture. The fossil fuel is the dark blue and the light blue is renewables. So if we come to just last year, you can see that renewables was nearly twice the fossil fuel investment. It means renewables are expanding very, very rapidly now. We are looking at, thank God, we're looking at a way that the whole world economy is seeing a cheaper way and a cleaner way to live. They also reported, same report, but because of the growth of clean energy, it's now having an impact on CO2 emissions. And that's really good news. It needs to happen faster, but it's good news. IEA, amazing analysts. Okay, yeah. So this one is an attempt to analyze what would happen with with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The big wedge at the top of purple color, that is if we did nothing, no more policies, no changes. We've already avoided that. Right. The current policies are in orange, would get us to maybe 2.5 or 2.9 degrees. But that's still a very dangerous warming. That will trigger more tipping points. So hopefully we can get to a lower pathway with rapid changes to clean energy and less beef. And so big companies are making big steps like that. That was agreed in Glasgow. A few messages from church leaders. This was the first ever joint report or joint statement from the head of the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. It was for COP26 in Glasgow. And they said, caring for God's creation is a spiritual commission requiring a responsive commitment. This is a critical moment, our children's future and the future of our common home depend on it. I agree. Really good. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, Anglican Communion, said, we believe God raised Jesus from the dead, so there is no situation beyond his power. If only we're willing to join him in the work of reconciliation to neighbours and to planet. Yeah, he urges people not to despair. That's right. We have more hope than any secular campaigners. Because without God, it seems really difficult and bad. With God, we know God leads us through difficult situations. That's normal. That's our experience. A little bit here, a little bit about how a clean economy uses less energy than a fossil fuel economy. Most people never think of this, and I love it. Right, if we start with a petrol car at the top, 80% of the energy from the petrol is wasted in heat. Only 20% moves the car. Because when you burn things, it is inefficient. If you could change it, right, if you have an electric car, but the electricity comes from burning coal, you waste 67% in the burning coal, The EV is very efficient, so a bit more of it is to move in the car. But most grids now have natural gas or something else. The natural gas is more efficient, so you have more of the energy that starts with moving the car. If we have hydropower, then almost all of the energy from the water turns into electricity, and then almost all of that goes in to moving the car. So you start with less energy to do the same car. Of course, you have to build that car, you have to have the electricity system, but it's not very simple. But the electrical car is using less energy, much less energy, than the fossil fuel old car. So we can move to a world where with solar energy and wind energy, we actually need less energy to do what we're doing. I have a question here from Seema.
A very short one. What is EV and how would you explain this hydro energy?
Okay, sorry. EV, electric vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So electric car, electric bus, sometimes even electric trucks now, they're just coming. Or electric scooter, electric motorbike.
And how does it get charged? By electricity or what?
Yeah, it's just like your laptop. It's just a bigger cable.
But do you think they're also good in country like where the climate is much more hotter if battery really works there?
Yes, the batteries work. You have to design the car correctly for the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
But places like California, Texas, where it's very hot, the EVs do work fine.
Okay.
Yeah, the technology is there to do that.
But doesn't it affect then we also need this energy, this electricity to make the battery and also be chargeable?
Yes.
So why not have petrol? Just trying
Yes,
to know,
yes, yes,
because
yes.
I think having petrol car is my favorite. I'm not into car, but just want to know why
Yeah.
battery.
Yeah, mainly because of this reason.
Mm-hmm.
That you can use the clean energy from solar and wind to move you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you're burning petrol, you are producing carbon dioxide. But also, pulling the oil out of the ground, refining it,
Mm-hmm.
that uses energy, that uses electricity actually. Transporting it across the world, 40% of all shipping in the world is moving coal, oil, and gas.
But doesn't it affect globally because some countries they have so much this oil and things that other countries buy, and that's a big income for that certain country.
Well, that's why Saudi Arabia, for example, is not very agreeing in these things. They're slow to agree these things because they rely on it.
Yeah.
But other countries, India imports a lot of oil. It's a big expense to their economy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if it's really true, but I just recently watched in the news that now there are these tunnels are building to Qatar or somewhere. Like if this is India, they are here.
Yes.
And then there would be a train and the pipeline for the fuel will flow and train. I don't know how they really, but
it's a delivery of gas.
Yeah.
They might do that. There's also an idea to build solar energy in Saudi Arabia and connect to India with an electricity cable. So in Indian evening, when the solar power is less, but further west, Saudi Arabia will have good solar at that time of the Indian evening, they can power India very cheaply. So the long distance electricity connections are coming now as well. These are quite complicated things.
Yeah.
But it's worth, I'm just trying to make the point that you can use less energy with clean energy. So there's another graph here. You see the difference between a petrol car, where so much is wasted, differently to the electric car, where almost all the energy goes into moving. Yeah, question, Catherine.
What do you say against this argument that it's so expensive to build those cars, and also the battery, if you have to, if it's not anymore working, it's also not good for it.
Okay, well, I have a personal example here. But most of this are problems, but they're not big problems. So all the points I hear on that sort of line is true, but not as important as they say. My phone, 3 years ago, had a better battery. Okay, we all know phone batteries decay. Car batteries seem quite different. they have a very good management system to keep them within the range. So I have an electric car. It's one of the earliest electric cars. It is 10 years old, and it still has 90% of battery capacity from when it was built. And that's an old model. It's an old technology, actually. The new ones seem to last even longer. So you sometimes see people say, oh, they'll need to change the battery in the car after 3 years because they're thinking about their phones. It's a different thing. To build an electric car, you do need more materials compared to building a petrol car. And electric cars are heavier because the battery is still quite heavy. There's several things happening. Firstly, the battery systems are getting better every year, so you need a lighter battery. The second thing is they are moving away from the terrible minerals like cobalt, which are mined by children in DRC mainly, Congo. And most new batteries do not use any cobalt. Whereas your phone, if you have a phone in your pocket or a laptop, it does use cobalt. And so there are constant changes in the systems. Interestingly, nobody will tell you this. Before batteries were common, we still produced cobalt. Any idea what industry uses cobalt? The oil refining industry. Almost all cobalt, even now, is used in oil refining. Then nobody was upset in those days, but this was taken by children. It was terrible. So you see, sometimes the information you get is selective, and people want to sell one message, but they ignore something else which is important. That's an example. But yeah, so the technology is going faster, and after about 2 years of driving, most new cars which are electric and now have a positive impact. So it takes about 2 years to change, to use less energy so that you have offset the extra energy used in constructing it. Yeah. But also we need to imagine, this was my next slide, it answers your question. If we look at the different amounts in the whole world where they're mining minerals, most of the mining is fossil fuels.
Yeah.
By a long way. Think about how big, maybe you don't know, but most of us did not see a huge coal mine, but it's a huge amount of material taken every week to burn somewhere. Same with oil, same with gas. Iron ore, the next biggest. But if we look at lithium, which is used for batteries like my phone, like many cars, there's a sodium-ion battery in some cars now. But it's a tiny amount. So it's not that there's no problem, it's just you have to think about the whole problem of mining. So here, there's an attempt to imagine this. Iron ore, the biggest metal we need, but the small ones we need for mobile phones or EVs, electric vehicles, are needed in much smaller amounts. But sometimes the refining is difficult for the environment. It's not clean. It's not that there's no problem. It's just the problem is less than the fossil fuel problem. Fossil fuel is a big problem. Right, we're coming towards the end of what I have. Yeah, I'm going to go straight to questions now, actually. I think. See what questions we have.
There are no questions.
There's no questions. Well, there must be more questions in this room because we just had some.
Thanks for the good teaching.
Okay, right back to the beginning. Did we achieve this? A clear understanding of what climate change actually is, how serious it is or not, and some of the steps we're taking. I hope we got closer, at least. I'll try to summarize the problems we have. Extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means the Earth is warmer, hotter. It's like having an extra coat. Okay? That really is happening. It gets worse with more carbon dioxide. The more is because we added to what the creation had already. The creation had a beautiful balance. We added a lot more, not a bit. So now it's getting hotter. That means more moisture in the air, heavier rain. It sometimes means droughts. It sometimes means very fast winds. It also means heat waves. And it also means, in the long term, sea level changes because of ice melting. That will affect coastal areas. That's a summary. That's where things are getting worse. The good news is other things are getting better, but technologies we have are going faster and faster. And so in a way, it is a race of two curves. The race of carbon dioxide and the race of improved technologies. But it isn't just that. If we had clean energy everywhere very cheaply, what would happen straight away? Many lives would be improved. Many people would waste a lot of energy as well. And so fundamentally, we still need to have a good relationship with the rest of creation. Because it's the relationship to creation that brought us this problem. We thought to ourselves, we can just use it, use it, use it. And some of that was because of a wrong interpretation of Genesis. Often seen political leaders and industrial leaders quote Genesis wrongly. What kind of rule did God mean? What is the ruling we have? Are we the boss, or are we the cooperative leadership that we hope we have in a Christian circle? Yeah, Sina.
Could you, I think I missed that. Could you explain again when you say clean energy, what does you actually mean?
Clean energy means anything which is not burning fossil fuels.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you
So
have an example of that?
on this roof, we have some solar panels.
Yes.
I know in the winter they do not produce a huge amount. In the summer, they probably produce more than the house needs. And the price of solar panels is coming down every year. So I think last year it came down by 40%. Just a huge change. The price of batteries. This is really funny. Most people haven't thought of this yet. But we in our house, we have our own battery now, and it stores this solar energy for the evening. Now, it did cost money, cost quite a lot of money. I think it will be 10 years before we've repaid that initial cost. Okay, so I thank God for the provision, and we borrowed money for it. But this is clever because it means when it's sunny, we can store the energy. Now, the price of those batteries is falling as well because battery manufacturing is getting more and more. I think they anticipate this year battery costs will fall by 50%. These things come down in steps as people open a big new factory and then it gets cheaper. So if you said 5 years ago that batteries would help the electricity system, people would have laughed at you. They're so expensive. They're big. In those days, the battery only lasts 5 years. Now the technology has moved very, very quickly, and we can have long-lasting batteries fairly cheaply. They're not very cheap, but the price keeps coming down. So there's some technologies which are getting better, and some which are not getting better. For example, the electric cars are improving. Petrol cars are not. It's a very mature technology. The technology of a petrol engine, very clever. It improved throughout the 20th century, and in the last 2 decades, really, it's hardly improved in efficiency. Because it got to a limit. It reached its limit. Interestingly, nuclear power also actually got more and more expensive. So it's about 15 times more expensive than solar and batteries. We have one in the UK, about halfway through building it, and the price just went up even more. So these things, you need to see where the direction of travel is. Solar, batteries, wind are getting cheaper. And you also have the benefit of the cleaner air, because you're not burning the coal or gas. You also have the benefit, you're not importing the solar, wind. So you're not importing every year petrol, diesel, or coal. The country of Ethiopia last month decided on an important decision. They import oil or diesel, and it costs them, I think it was 6 billion every year. They do not have their own. But they do have a big hydropower electricity from the River Nile. They just finished it. They also have wind energy. They also have solar energy. They made a decision. We will not have any more petrol or diesel cars imported to our country. We will only import electric vehicles. Ethiopia. So they know that this will protect their country from the way that oil price goes up, goes down, goes up. When it's down, people say, oh, it's wonderful, then we'll build more oil. Then it goes up again because there's a conflict in Ukraine or something. So even some African countries are now adapting to the changes. They see the economic benefit. There are countries where really there's not enough electricity produced yet to do lots of EVs. So that's true. Yeah. More questions from little ones. What other questions?
How do you see this topic changes the Christian world somehow? Like, because for me, maybe this is not the reality, but for me it seems generally, especially the evangelical Christians are the ones who are against it the most.
Yeah.
Maybe Trump and some others.
Yeah, well, Trump maybe is
Counting out the Christians is another conversation.
Yeah, that's why I
mention him separately.
But there's Christian nationalism in America. That's different. And he's definitely got the support of nationalists. But even I understand in many parts of Europe, the evangelicals do not realize the situation for climate is real. I have often heard Christian leaders who don't understand it very well say, oh, this isn't a problem, we should just trust God. They're wrong. And they will discover that. That's partly because they are suspicious of science altogether. But these are people who, they have phones, they like technology, that came from understanding God's earth, which is called science. So they should adapt that understanding and inform them. But it is important, like this session now, that we can understand these big changes in a biblical worldview. So I do quite a lot of talks to Christians in the UK. I did a talk to a Christian, what was it? It was a Christian radio station in Germany. And her questions were all this sort of thing, but people say it's not real or it's not a problem or it's made up to control people and introduce government controls and taxes, these sorts of lines. So I was just able to say, even if there are new rules, don't forget we've had rules for other things in the past, which allowed the growth of society with fossil fuels. Now we need to replace them with the right rules, fair rules for renewal. And then I said, really though, there is a problem. The climate problem is not something which you can wish away. We have to respond to it. And actually, Christians should be at the beginning of that, not the end. Because It is a justice issue and it's a sin issue. If we understand it that way, we can be the first people to write to our government and say, please do more, and make our own decisions. Can we avoid oil? If we can, we should. Many people cannot yet. And many people I know now work in clean industries. Really interesting. The young people want to go into these industries. The oil companies struggle to recruit anybody. Many of the oil experts are in their 50s, 60s, 70s years old, because very few young people want to join that industry. But they do love moving into technology and fitting solar panels and designing the electrical grid systems. It's amazing what you can see now developing. Yeah, but I think the answer is, I wish the church would wake up to more reality. Some churches have. Some churches haven't. And also, I'm very frustrated myself, but mostly the churches that have woken up to this are more liberal and less evangelical. And I have no idea why that is, because we who trust the Bible first can see from the very first page that we are supposed to be ruling the earth in a God standard. So we could very quickly change to the right steps. And because this thing has been politicized in the West, it might be different in other countries, but here, most of the solutions seem to come from left-wing parties with left-wing agendas. The right-wing are not very loud. And sometimes they say this is nonsense. But most businesses are very keen for rapid change. So many of the right-wing businesses are keen for rapid changes. And in fact, in the UK, there's a whole campaigning by most businesses to say, come on, we need the right policies so we can change. So it has been politicized, but I don't think that was sensible, because it's fundamentally a physical reality based on a spiritual problem. Yeah. I'm happy you can get me invited to any evangelical pastors. And I'll try to explain to them. Yeah. I could do it in 40 minutes, I could do this. Or another dear lady, Catherine Hayhoe, that I mentioned. She is a climate scientist based in America. She is superb at communicating this to Christians. Her TED talk has been watched, I think, 40 million times, which is just absolutely brilliant. So we had her talk to a YWAM gathering last September, a small gathering, and I would like to have her in front of other leaders. She's just really, really, really clear and good. Yeah. I like to imagine she's my friend, but she isn't really. All I mean is she responded to my emails. She's like, but I should say that lady, climate scientist, was a missionary kid. Her father was a missionary in Panama, and she saw the impacts of bad caring for the environment in Panama on poor people. And so her motivation, listen to her heart, her motivation in teaching climate change is to help people in the poorer parts of the world who did not emit very much, but are already suffering a lot with changes in the rainfall and the heat. And she's a saint. She really is. Are we running dry?
Is there a question?
In the break time, actually, I was just talking to Catherine. She mentioned that in the Moldova area, they see the sea level going down.
No, not the sea, the river.
Oh yeah, river.
It's dry.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is river.
Yeah.
Sea level.
Yeah, you don't have a coastline.
Yes, they do.
I want to share one more thing. Hang on. I'm going to talk quickly about YWAM Paisley. Slideshow. Why did it make it so big? Can the Zoom camera pick this instead of share screen? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just we are doing a seminar. Zoom back. In Scotland this June. The seminar is called Foundations of Creation Care. It's a week in the place. You have to come, and we're looking at the theology of creation care, and we're looking at lots of these global issues to see them in a biblical point of view. We're also looking at eco-anxiety. Many young people, including some in our DTS, are deeply worried and frightened about their future. So what does Jesus have to say? So this is from last year. That's Phil, my dear colleague and friend, looking at composting. And last week we were adding more compost from the YWAM Centre. That's the building in the background, the old Scottish building we have. God gave us that many years ago. It's cold. It will be fine in June. This is one of the practical things we did in a seminar was prepare a bed for growing. It's my friend Adam, who is from England, and the other participants. We're carefully arranging it so that the insects cannot come to eat the soil, and we grew things in this place. And then another one we're showing how to grow. This is quite small scale. It does help feed our DTS, but it's small scale. I chatted to the YWAM leader a few months ago, and I said, well, maybe we should have all of this grass growing. If we had the problems with food internationally, maybe we can do that. She said, yeah, why not? So why not? Because it's a lot of hard work, actually. Anyway, so that's us. We also have a little bit of land outside where we have not cut the grass, and we're letting the natural flowers grow because that's good for insects, the kind of insects that we need to help the food grow well. And we've studied that, and we're reporting to a national arrangement about how many bees we find. So isn't it useful? So that's June. You can see it on our website. And the other thing I can talk to you about is COP. Will I be able to do that? Why has it gone to full screen? I was going to show you.
Would you like to full screen or not?
I want to be able to share this. Let's try now.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, this will give me a chance. This is how we were involved. And I will now share this on Zoom. Right. Yeah, good. So this is like an outreach, really, to the United Nations conference. It was in Dubai last year. I had to wear a hat and a suit. It was too hot. Funny. But the weeks before, in YWAM Paisley, we had had special times of intercession, asking God what mattered the most. What should we pray? And even during the UN conference when I was in Dubai, they had this prayer meeting and they had various scriptures and things. One of the things God showed us was that there were hidden things in some countries' negotiations that He wanted to come out. It was like hidden things have to become visible. And we prayed that carefully. And then on the, we had that before, and then some things were found by the media, very useful. And then during the conference, OPEC, which is the big organization of oil-producing countries, had a secret letter. They were panicked. They said, if we're not careful, we will lose a huge oil thing. Quickly mobilize all of your forces. But the letter was leaked. It came to the press. And that really coincided with our prayer. Now, be clear, every country has to have secret negotiations. They have to. But some things God judges are too evil. Some secret things have to come. And God is the judge of which things. We prayed it. Bing, it came. We were delighted, and that did change the direction. Because when you deceive people badly, it's evil. So I had this official badge, got it. So the United Nations tries to be transparent and allow observers to come in. And I was with my friend Brian Bishop, who is from Colorado Springs. Many years he's been in Wyoming Communications. Great guy. Here we are sitting on the Dubai Metro. Well, guess what? Dubai Metro is a very busy place. Most of them are South Indian, right? West Indian. You can hear lots of Hindi, lots of Telugu. But I was with a group of Christians, and I was the only climate scientist in this group. So they would ask me many questions in the metro. Suddenly I realized the Indian people were all listening. I'm very interested. Oh, a climate scientist. I thought, oh, this is my opportunity. So then I talked about God's care for creation. I talked about humans being so sinful and how we need forgiveness. I talked about Jesus coming to redeem all of us and all of creation, also that the people in the metro would hear it. So I was finding a way, to be helpful. One day I listened in the metro to some UN delegates who were in the metro car. Oh, they're Christians. Oh, this is a Christian group. Oh, this must be a good opportunity. And then I discovered they must be from the Vatican, because they were talking about the Pope so much. So I said, oh, this must be God. I took my opportunity. I said, I'm very sorry. I listened into your conversation. Please forgive me. But I'm from an evangelical group, and we are very influenced by the Pope's writings in this space because he interprets the Bible well. Thank you very much for what you're doing. I said, this is my opportunity to build relationships between the evangelical groups and the Catholic groups, and we can work together and all this. So it was a nice conversation. Very next day, they are in the big meeting in front of the whole world, the same three people. And what was interesting, they mentioned the needs of young people in a way that no other nation said. Every other nation talks about economy and numbers, but Christians talk about the effects on people. We have God's heart, and it's a different way. We bring something different to the whole thing about climate, because we're connected to communities in every part of the world. It's totally different to a government or most scientists or most engineering companies. They think in numbers. We try to think in people. I'm sorry, most of my presentation was numbers. But we try to think in people. And one conversation I have with anybody in the United Nations, or anybody I meet on the aeroplane, if they're from a different country, I say, tell me about your country. That's the missionary question. Tell me about any unusual weather that you have been having. I'm very interested. I'm a scientist. I'm also interested because I'm a missionary. I want to know what's happening to the people. If we care about the people, God wants us to reach every nation. This is an impact now happening. We have to be helpful to them and interested in them. And so I had this, you see this meeting, this moment, these are high-level government delegates, but they're waiting for the next meeting. And I have privileged access. I'm there with my cup of tea. So I sit down, and before long, I listen in to and join a conversation with Eswatini, which is an African country right down in southern Africa. It used to be called Swaziland. Because they were on the phone to their government in Eswatini where they were sorting out the consequences of a huge hailstorm 2 days before. The hailstones were so big, they smashed the windows of the government vehicles. They were huge. They were so big, they damaged a lot of the farming. So I said, yeah, but maybe you had this in your grandparents' time. It's not unusual, huh? He said, no, we never had it. Until the last 10 years, we never had big hailstorms like this. We used to enjoy running in the hail when we were children because it was fun. You know, a little bit of ice is fun. Now, if we run in this hail, it hits you on the head, it really hurts. If it smashes windows, probably dangerous. Right. So, look, I'm just saying this is an example of a conversation I had. And because I'm here with a Christian organization, then the conversation turns to faith, it turns to church. He talked to me about Noah. An interesting guy, right? Really good. Another example. This young man here is an American college student. He was with our group. We were training them in understanding climate from a Christian point of view. All morning he was talking to me, how do I have a conversation with the government opportunities? Well, how do I make the most of it? And my advice was, do not think of yourself as a small person. You have every right here. You have an official badge. You've been invited by the United Nations. You can engage with them because they need you. You need them. Do not think of yourself small. And also, you and God is a majority. This is the same. If he was in DTS, I'd do the same thing. I'd love it if he did DTS. So with that discipleship process, he then suddenly saw this man, the older man, is a United States elected representative in the government. He said, oh, maybe I could talk to him. I said, go talk to him. So he went up and he introduced himself. I'm with the Christian Climate Observers Organization, and I want to ask you, can we do this together? Can we do that together? What do you need from us with churches? It's a great engagement. If he was at home, he would not have that access. Last year we had a sister from Kenya. She's doing amazing work with women who are farmers. And she'd been trying to have contact with her local government for many years, and they said, no. And then she saw the head of the local government in the United Nations conference in Egypt, and she went up confidently, hello, madam, I am from your part of Kenya. We do this amazing work with women. Can you please help us? And since then, they've been working together. So it's a moment to increase your influence. And one thing I learned from my previous time in the missions is God can give you unusual influence. Remember that woman I talked about, the singer, and all the paparazzi when she arrives in her home country? And it's amazing what she gets. She sung for the president of that country. It's amazing. So we can aim high. You might be in a situation. By adapting in your situation, you adapt to the new levels of rain or the new farming, where you are able to talk to your government. Take it. God can use you more than you imagine. It's not just you. It's not just little YWAM. It's amazing God. And now we can understand that the climate is shifting. We are experiencing these changes. Ask God, what can we do next that will have a big impact, not a small impact? God is not. Remember the time of the spies going into the land from when Israelites were sent 12 spies. Only 2 believed that the big challenge was possible with God. Yeah? We must be those people who believe big challenge, yes, definitely possible with God. That's where we are. And they even had a faith pavilion. My friend Brian there with the hat. And we prayed for this Ugandan lady who I mentioned. So, there are opportunities, not just problems, there are opportunities. And we have faced challenges before. Let's go forward with God. That's what I have for you. In Scotland we say, that's me.